Dear church, let's talk about shepherding the sheep. Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit, transformation, prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is found in Christ. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris McCurley. And as always, we have a wonderful guest joining us today. Not too far down the road from us here in Dixon, over in Knoxville, Jeremy Weekley. Jeremy, I've been wanting to have you on for quite some time. I'm glad we finally worked that out. And I appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Love your work. Love what you do there at West End in Knoxville. Tell us a little bit about that and tell us about your family and just what's going on in your world right now.
Yeah, so I've been at West End for almost 10 years now as the preaching minister, and things are going great here. We have a lot of people are moving to Tennessee, moving to the Knoxville area. So not only are we having families that are already associated with the church move in, especially young professionals. This is an area where a lot of young professionals are coming. But we also are reaching out to our community. Our outreach minister, Hector Cortez, has done a wonderful job of helping us to figure out how to connect with the community around us. So we've been, reaching people in our community as well. So I've been married to my wife, Sally, for 26 years and 26 wonderful years. I don't know if she would say that too, but anyway, yeah. So we have two children. Addie is a senior social work major at Freed-Hardeman, and then Grant is he just started classes today at ETSU. So he's a cybersecurity major as a freshman there, just up the road a little piece there from us.
Fantastic. And there's a few connections here that'll bore our listeners and viewers to death. But a few that, number one, your youth minister, Andrew Lopez, is a West Texas guy. I came from Abilene. He came from that area as well. And so he's a long way from home.
Yes.
And then you spent some time in Selmer, Tennessee. My son-in-law is from Raymer, McNairy County, so we know that area well. And then third, you look very similar to a good friend of mine in Abilene, Coach Grant Martin, who coaches the Wiley baseball team there. I'm going to have to give him a shout out. But so those are all the connections. I love your preaching, love the way you approach God's word. And I wanted to have you come on. Actually, we were talking about having you come on for a different reason, and then it got switched because you piqued my interest with something that you talk a lot about, which is shepherding the sheep.
Yes.
And to my knowledge, you're not an elder also at West End, right?
No, that's correct.
Obviously, this is a subject you two have studied, and I'm involved with a work right now, the Shepherding Network, and speaking at their conference in November.
Great.
And so I was very interested to hear your take on the subject of shepherding the sheep. So talk a little bit give us an introductory to kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so a lot of times we talk about models, and models are, when we start appointing elders in the church, we often go, to 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1, and that's kind of where we start. And I think the problem with that is that's more of incorporates the responsibilities, the roles of our elders, but the model is found in Jesus, right? The model for a shepherd is found in Jesus. And that shepherding imagery is used throughout both the Old Testament and the New Testament. You look at just the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. It was something that really would have resonated with them. And I think we've kind of lost that as we've moved away from being a society connected so much to agriculture, right? As technological society. So reaching back to that model was really what I wanted to do is what does that mean? The Lord is my shepherd. And then we come to Ezekiel 34, the discussion about bad shepherds. And then you come to John chapter 10, where Jesus says he is the good shepherd. Then you come to a place like 1 Peter chapter 5, where Peter talks about, shepherd the flock that is among you. And so kind of connected a lot of those dots, right, to make sure that I was on the right track with that. But then it kind of developed more into, I'm a very practical person. If you've seen my preaching, I like to use illustrations. I like to connect people to things they will see, whether it's a tree or a backpack, whatever it might be, something they will see that will connect them back to what they've heard. And so as I was searching for this, I didn't want to just do some, theoretical model. I wanted to have something that was, like Jesus was, very practical in how he approached, how he shepherded the apostles, looked at the disciples that were following him. and that model he gives our church leaders on how to shepherd the flock. After he's back in heaven with the Father, what is that supposed to look like for the men who are going to lead the sheep? And it kind of ended up being, I really narrowed it down to 5 key elements that I found not only in the life of Christ, but also throughout Scripture. As you look at whether the Old Testament or New Testament, that concept of what it means to be a shepherd.
Yeah, you're singing my song. We've had many on here talk about shepherding. They all did a great job. And one of the things that we always talk about is that we can't get caught up in a checklist with the qualifications. That maybe the bigger question, or the question before we go to those qualifications, is, are they Spirit-filled, Spirit-led?
Right.
Are they striving to be like Jesus? Because
Absolutely.
you can meet a lot of that criteria and still not be like Jesus. And I'm not saying that the criteria, the qualifications are not important. They obviously are. They're scriptural, but they're not a checklist. And so I love what you said there. So 5 key elements. Let's walk us through those 5 key elements when it comes to shepherding the sheep.
Right. Everybody has their list, right? And this is not really original, I guess, per se. It's what I just kind of, as I looked at Scripture and narrowed it down. And so one of those, they all start with of course, I'm a preacher, right? I got to do that.
Right.
But the first of those is edifying and exhorting. We find that, the elders are to be those who are not only encouraging, right, lifting up, edifying the church, building up the church, to be the leaders in that, but also to take the lead in learning how to speak the truth in love, to admonish people with love, to help us all stay on the right track, right? With a shepherd, they would do that with their sheep. And so that's the first major element. The second element is equipping. And I think sometimes, we look at Ephesians chapter 4, and elders are told that they are to equip the members for the works of service. And so that equipping is not, in the workforce, continuing education, if you're in education or some similar field, or continual trainings. I mean, that's normal. But what is that supposed to look like in the church? And I think sometimes we just forget that. We've gotten a lot better. Like, I know a lot of lectureships and a lot of conferences, like you talked about the shepherding conference, but like Polishing the Pulpit, they will almost always now have, a segment that is for leaders, especially elders. So we're getting better at this training and equipping them, but are they learning to then come back and equip the flock at West End or at Walnut Street or whatever it is? How are they equipping individuals, right? So the micro shepherding and the macro shepherding models, right? It's supposed to be both of those. And then the next one is educating. It's obvious they are, from one of the qualifications, they are to be, apt to teach, right? We talk about that. But that education doesn't end in a classroom. That education can be sharing wisdom. One of those words that, elder means an older person, right? A more mature person. So they should have some wisdom to be able to share with members of the congregation. One of our elders recently we have several young professionals that are about to have children. And he had all 5 of those young people over, all 5 of those couples over to their house, and just said, what questions do you have? What can I address for you? What do you want to know about parenting? And it was just this opportunity to share some wisdom they had in their relationship, raising their children with people who are about to start that journey. So another aspect is evangelizing. Obviously, they should take the lead on leading the congregation, but evangelism doesn't stop with teaching somebody the Word of God in order to become a Christian, because, it's not about being a Christian. It's about the becoming part of that, becoming like Christ. And so again, this idea of continuing that evangelism, sharing that news with them, to challenge them and encourage them. And then the last one is that part that most, I guess we have seen the most in the 20th and 21st century is among elderships, is the exercising oversight, kind of the management, the stewardship part. And like I said, that's just one aspect, one part of the role of a shepherd, but it is a part of that role for them to exercise that oversight. And you go back to Ezekiel 34, they weren't doing a good job of that. And so they definitely must do that as well.
Yeah, I'll tell my audience that's watching on Facebook and YouTube, you see me keep looking down. I've got these notes on my phone, and you probably can't see them, but you've got this in a really nice, neat, I assume what is a pamphlet or a tract, and man, it's really good, the imagery and everything. We'll make that available to anybody who wants it.
Sure.
But that is fantastic. So I'm reading through these, and I was reading through them before we got on here to kind of, see the commentary on each one of these.
Sure.
And I love the approach because I think we've lamented this for years, is nobody really teaches you how to become an elder. Right. And what happens all too often is we pull elders from our pool of deacons, and they become an elder, and they know how to be a deacon pretty well, but they don't really know how to be an elder. And so they default to doing deacon's work because that's just what they've always known, and you can't blame them. Right. We don't really provide training. And if I could brag on mine here, and yours are probably the same way, we have a really strong eldership here. And I sat and thought about it one day, and I thought, why are our guys so good and so well trained, it seems? And if you look through the history of our leadership here, it's like no one's dropped the ball. They just continue to pass the torch.
Yes.
And one generation trains the next generation and what it looks like to be an elder. And I think that's so key. Have you noticed that as well? I'm sure you have, is why you put this together. But what do you think are some really, maybe can't miss things that need to happen in order to get elders to a point where they really embrace and understand the role?
Absolutely. And one of the things I think, like you said, is identifying men early on that you want to mentor, right? Maybe that's a part of that education part, is you're looking for a man that you want to pass wisdom and knowledge on to about how to become an elder. But, some of those can't miss things is we're looking for men who know how valuable relationships are in the kingdom. They are already doing the work, obviously, but there are people that others, and this is natural, gravitate towards, right? They gravitate to those people. And it's because a lot of times those people are paying attention. They will listen. And so those are things that I think are important, because you can have a person, like you said, and a lot of this research that I was doing would make comparisons between what we think leaders are in terms of the business industry, whatever that might be, and then leadership in the eyes of God, and how those can be two very different things. It doesn't mean that everything we learn in the business world about leadership is bad. It's just sometimes we just want to take that model and apply it to being an elder. Well, that's not necessarily true. Just because you're a good supervisor or manager in a business setting doesn't mean that will, come over to being an elder, because it's 100% about these relationships. And it's not just about the relationships of the people in the congregation, but their relationship with Christ, the relationship with God. And so people who understand how important those relationships are, they've got to be able to talk to people, right? They have to be able to notice things in people and be proactive in how they approach folks about the things, good or bad, that they need to take care of spiritually in their lives. So we're kind of looking, those are things to me, that relationship aspect is huge in terms of being a shepherd.
Yeah. So if I hear you correctly, and this has hit me like a ton of bricks. I never really thought about this until you said that, but it sounds like to me that what you're saying is that we're looking for a particular person almost first before we look at any of these other qualifications and things of that nature. We're looking at someone who stands out character-wise, and someone who doesn't need the title because they're already fulfilling the duty, or they're close, and we feel like that we can help them get to that point. It's in the near future. Yeah, I mean, I guess I always knew that, but the way you framed it there makes a lot of sense. Looking for the character, because like you said, I've known some great guys in the past that were submitted as elders because they were very successful in business. They knew how to run a business, and it didn't transfer over, because while they were great in that realm, what does it take to be successful in that realm? A lot of times it takes a real alpha male person, someone who's really type A, somebody who, drives the ship, and it's my way or the highway, or, because I'm invested in this, and if I fail, we all fail, kind of thing. And that's a very different way of relating to the eldership as one among many. And sometimes that can be pretty rough, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's important too, because and you understand this, you've worked with different elderships, and I have as well, is the dynamic within the room, just among the eldership itself. There's there's kind of a microcosm of the congregation as a whole. And so within those relationships as well. So you're looking at somebody, and it's not necessarily we're looking at somebody just, for, their the way that they interact with other people, because they're, like we talked about the qualifications list, there are other things that we need to consider. But
Right.
that's what I've noticed is those people, you've got to have those people in the room, the people who understand when you make a decision, it's not just a financial decision or a program decision. These are people's souls that we're working with. And so our men are very aware of that, and all of them are very good to consider those things. But that's, Jesus, that's the way Jesus was trying to model and mentor, for his apostles, the idea of these, building these relationships with people, and working with them, not necessarily a kingdom idea, not bricks and mortar kind of thing, right? It's people's souls you're going to be working with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've always said that if we're looking at qualifications, whether it's Titus or Timothy, if we're looking at those qualifications, why don't we ever look at Galatians 5?
Oh yeah, fruit of the Spirit.
Fruit of the Spirit. Are they filled with the Spirit? Do they display that fruit in their lives? And that sounds like kind of what you're getting at is, do they display that character, which would certainly make them more Christ-like? Have you presented this at other places? I mean, you've got this so well done and so well laid out, and you have a section here, how to use the shepherding log.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
When we talk about the shepherding log, first of all, talk about that, and then talk about how this is presented.
Yeah. So, really, this kind of came out of my doctoral research. And again, I'm a practical person. Like I don't like, the theoretical is good, but I want to put, ink to paper. And I thought, what does all this mean? Like for the average man that comes in to be an elder, it can be very overwhelming. What is something I could hand to a person and say, listen, this is what a shepherd does, right? We could study Psalm 23. We could go through all the scriptural study, but at the end of the day, like, what does this mean Monday night when you get home from work and you want to do some shepherding? What does it look like? And so the shepherding log that I came up with really takes those five key element areas. And what it does is it just kind of puts, like ink to paper, the idea of edifying and exhorting. If I come home on Monday night, I'm going to write down somebody's name and then kind of answer the question, well, how does that person need encouragement this week? And so as an elder, you could sit there on the couch and let's say that perhaps Sunday morning, you noticed a man that he's very busy. He's a successful guy, so he's busy, but he goes to all of his kids' games, all of that stuff. But he also is a man that brings his family to church. Man, why not text that guy just out of the blue and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know it is so encouraging to see that you bring your family to church, you lead them spiritually, you care about the church, you care about God, you're showing them what it means to be a Christian, and just send that man a text. It doesn't have to be a phone call. It doesn't have to be a visit. You can just be a text to say, I wanted to encourage somebody this week. Cause sometimes those men are wondering if they're doing anything right. And so some encouragement helps them. And then and the idea is each of those 5 areas has something that it attaches, like an action item that attaches to that. And it just allows a person coming into eldership to say, I'm going to involve myself in this. And this is really kind of on the micro shepherding level. So what does each individual elder do? Like when it comes to equipping, maybe it's a ministry that you work directly with. You might need to go to lunch with the deacon that is in that ministry area and say, what do you need from the elders? What can we do to help you in your ministry? Do you have some goals for your ministry? Just to kind of mentor them and help them to shape and form that ministry. And then, the evangelizing, how am I going to help somebody grow this week in their faith? Maybe I need to encourage somebody. I know I'm going to be out of town in 3 weeks and I'm teaching a class. Hey, Joe over here, Joe, maybe he would be a good teacher. I don't know. I'm going to ask him to teach the class for me. I'm going to help him. I'm going to help him develop an outline. I'm going to teach him how to study this, to present it. And so I'm just going to keep, doing those kind of things. The educating is, again, like one of our elders did. You just invite folks over you can share some wisdom with. You can just sit down and have a meal with them. And then exercising oversight, again, might be something about a ministry and asking a deacon, hey, how can I help you to figure out how to make your ministry more effective here at West End or whatever congregation you're at? And so the idea is that weekly log, you have 5 areas where you're going to kind of concentrate as an individual elder. And here's here's the point of all this, is that when you get in the room, if you've done the micro shepherding, when you're starting to do the macro shepherding, you're going to have better information, more information, a better feel for the congregation. You're going to know the sheep better. And so when you go to make a big decision, all these conversations, all of these things that you've done, all of the trust that you've built in the members, that will all come to fruition in your macro shepherding if you have been doing the micro shepherding as you should. And this is just kind of, like I said, a practical tool that allows men to kind of focus not on just one area. Because I notice a lot of elders and elders everywhere, you get pretty overwhelmed with certain things, right? You might have, we're doing a building program. And so the whole meeting is about a building program or whatever it might be. This helps in your macro to say, what are we doing with these ministries? What are we doing for these people? What are we doing for this age group? And it becomes more shepherding than it becomes overseeing only, and just saying, we're just making decisions for the whole congregation, but you've not had a lot of input from people in the congregation. It kind of brings the living room to the boardroom, so to speak, because you've been in the living room theoretically, right? However you've been connecting with the sheep. So.
Yeah, you've said shepherding a lot, and I love that. And, we made a concerted effort here. One of our elders brought that up at a meeting that we're going to go by shepherds and not elder. I mean, that was a planned thing that in our presentation, because they felt like that was a better moniker for what they did. That's always the rub, though, and I mentioned it a while ago, is for shepherds to just shepherd and let the deacons handle the day-to-day. And that, it's really tough. I've noticed over the years when, we get an agenda for the elders meeting, so many things on the agenda, you're thinking, this is deacons' work. A lot of this is. Right. What advice would you give to shepherds to be able to just turn that loose? I know sometimes shepherds say, well, we don't trust our deacon or deacons to get that done. And, that's a problem in and of itself, right? But how do we encourage shepherds to be able to let that go and just shepherd?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons I came up with this log is for, an elder to really think about, to intentionally think about how they can help a deacon with a ministry, because that's a part of, it's on here a couple of times, but then also that helps build trust for that elder with, they're providing direction and mentorship and wisdom to that deacon. But then, because I think sometimes elders come into meetings and nobody knows what's going on in that ministry, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got an elder who, because I know our elders kind of break up the different ministries, a lot of congregations do. If you have an elder that is working with that ministry and that subject comes up, he says, hey, you know what? Let me call Joe about that. Joe's been working on that. We've had a conversation. He's got some ideas. Let me just have him send you an email about some of the plans he has, the goals he has for that ministry, and then you can move on in the meeting, right? Because somebody's been in touch with Joe and knows what Joe is doing as a deacon and has helped him and has mentored him so that he has a better idea of perhaps what the elders are expecting. And so that enables, right, that deacon. Sometimes it's easy to make decisions and then second guess the deacon. After you say, we want you to lead this, and then they make a decision, you're like, well, and so a lot of that in any organization, right? Communication is key. And this allows an elder, not a whole group of people to jump on somebody, but an elder to work with that individual and help them formulate, what the elders have as a vision for that ministry, and then let them be the boots on the ground for that, and say, take it and run with it now, and let them, lead that effort. But in the session with all the other elders, you have somebody who knows what's going on in that ministry and can speak to it, and then you can move on.
Really good stuff. Yeah. And I you could agree or disagree with me on this. I think some of my shepherds probably disagree with me on this, and and that's okay. We have fun with it. But, there's a sense in where I've told my shepherds, I want you to not have to know. I hear it a lot among shepherds is, well, we just want to know. We just want to know what's going on. We don't like to be blindsided. And I totally get that.
Right.
I really do.
Yeah.
But I also come back and say, but my goal is, for the most part, for you to not have to know. In other words, when somebody comes with some minuscule thing or some work that's more deacon related or a task of some kind, you to be able to say, I don't know, that's Chris's job or that's
Right.
so-and-so's job. And I've tried to make that a goal. Now, I understand where they're coming from, and so I try to keep that in mind. But when it comes to the minor things, I just want them to focus on shepherding. And I tell them all the time, I'd like to put out fires before they ever even get to you.
Right.
And I would like for you to be able to say, I don't know, and to be good with that. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's kind of where I come from.
Yes. Yeah. And I think Aubrey Johnson, he does a lot of deacon training sessions. And one of the things that he always says, and I believe this is in his book, the idea of the purpose of the deacon is to make the elder's job easier, right? Make that easier, be a person they can trust. But at the end of the day, an elder can say, well, like you said, I don't know exactly what's going on, but why don't you go talk to so-and-so, because that's who's in charge of that. And then they're going to get answers from them. But, and some frustrations sometimes as a deacon, they just don't even know what they're supposed to do. They don't have clear direction. And again, that's part of this log, this practical thing you do each week is you're touching base with these deacons, you're touching base with these folks in ministries, and you're giving them some direction. But it doesn't take you 30, 40, 45 minutes. It takes you a few minutes. Or, maybe if you're going to lunch, it's a big project coming up in their ministry area. Maybe you spend spend an hour a week, and then they spend the rest of the time working that ministry, which is really, if you go back and we're looking at the early church, that seems to be the role of the deacon, is to allow the apostles, elders to concentrate on the work of the church, to protect it, to help it to grow, to provide leadership after the model of Christ, right? And so these are the folks that are supposed to help get that practical work done.
Yeah. Jeremy, I think it's essential for the staff, for the preacher to have a strong friendship or relationship with his shepherds. You could approach this like, hey, they're my bosses and I'm their employee. And the shepherds could approach it like, hey, you're our employee and we're your boss. I don't think that that's the best approach.
No.
I think there's a sense in which that's true. Jeff Jenkins told me one time he had a young man tell him, well, they're not my boss. And he's like, well, I think the comment was something like, they're not my boss, God is. And Jeff said, well, God doesn't sign your checks.
That's
and
right.
So I think I think there's a lot of truth to that. So there is an employee-boss relationship to some degree, but I think the better way to look at it is a covenant partnership.
Yeah, that's good.
And I feel strongly that we should have a good relationship in and out of meetings and in and outside the church.
Absolutely.
Talk about some ways that you think we can strengthen that bond among the staff and among the elders as a whole.
Yeah. And one of the things that our elders do, and this was a huge level of trust when I was doing this research, one of the projects that I chose was to do a case study. And I came to them and I said, can I do a case study on you and shepherding? And they were like, oh, okay. So I did something that quite often preachers, we don't do enough of. I sat back and just tried to objectively, as much as I could. I know there'll be somebody saying, oh, you can't take out all the bias. I understand. But I stepped back as much as I could objectively, and I just watched. And there were things, Chris, that I saw that I had never seen before that our elders do. For instance, there was a lady one morning that approached me, and I was getting ready to do the welcome, and she caught me in the lobby, and she was crying and she was talking. One of our elders came up and he took control of that situation, and he just talked to her. And as I walked down the aisle to do the welcome, I looked back and he was praying with her. And it's like, I've never noticed that before. And they would talk about visits that they've made that I'm just not aware of. Somebody recently commented on a couple of elders came to their house before a major surgery, and I wasn't aware of that. And a lot of people just aren't aware of that. But one of the things I love here, you talked about being friend. One of the best things you can do, go to lunch with your elders. If you're a preacher, sometimes maybe you have to initiate that. But in that room, like we have 9 elders. And so, that's valuable time spent when you put your feet under the same table and just talk about the church and the love you had for God's people. Don't make it a business meeting. Just get to know them. And what's going to happen is you're going to start to understand how they think, how they feel, what their dreams and visions are. And what I've often found is you're on the same page on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And man, you're building a lot of equity for the times when you have the difficult conversations in the room, right?
Yeah.
I can be a pretty passionate person in an elders meeting. They allow me to be in there and to have input. And I appreciate that very much. That's something I would recommend for elders to do, is involve your preacher in your meetings. There are times where they don't need to be there. I get that, but in as much as you can. But the other side of it is just that builds so much trust where you can have the difficult conversations, and it's not political. It's not an agenda. It is, we really care about what's best for the Lord's church. And that's why people are passionate in these meetings, is because we really do care about these people and we want them to go to heaven, and we want to do the best job leading the church because that's what Christ instructed us to do. So let's do that. And then you can be passionate in the meetings. You can, say things and still ask for forgiveness, and they'll forgive you afterwards.
Yes.
But you got to invest that time outside of the church. Lunches, go to their house, invite them to your home, and just let them be a part of your family and a part of your life in general. That's huge.
Yeah. I love it. Man, Jeremy, it's great stuff. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the podcast. And
absolutely.
Look forward to hearing more from you and your preaching and in every way. So tell us how we can keep up with you, what you got going on, just anything you want to promote. We want to highlight the good on this podcast. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for doing that. So I preach at West End Church of Christ. You can always find us there, wecoc.org. You can find my sermons and stuff there. You can catch me on Facebook as well, Jeremy Weekley, and you can friend me there. Instagram, Jeremy.Weekley. And I have a podcast with Billy Bearden. I think you know him as well. That's another connection. I don't know if you knew we had.
I missed that connection. Yeah, Billy was with you for a while. So for those who are listening and watching, Billy is the preacher where my daughter goes to church.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we have a podcast called Not Just Sundays, and we really enjoy that. Right now we're talking about, customs, culture, and Christians, just kind of things that have just kind of always been perhaps in the church, and we just try to take a fresh look at it. But next season is we're going to do a series called Elephant in the Church. You may have preached something. I've preached that here several times in other congregations, just looking at some hard things to talk about in the church, but things we need to talk about in the church. So that's kind of me, and I'm here in Knoxville, all right? Go Vols. That may not be something you wanted to hear me say, but I got to say that.
Yeah, we can edit that. No, man, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I want to tell our viewers and listeners that if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And if you have a specific question for Jeremy, we will forward it on to him, and I'm sure he'd be willing to answer any question you might have or pass along some of this material. If you want that, we'll make sure that we send your request on and hopefully get you hooked up with all of that. Jeremy, thanks again, buddy.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, appreciate you and appreciate everyone tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris. Thanks, Jeremy.